Okay, this video we're going to look at scheduling. So this is the last step in the time management process. So developing the schedule involves taking the precedence diagram, which we developed in the sequencing process, and the work packages, resources, and durations, and putting them in as well. So then you put it all together into the schedule, and then you optimize it. So you level resources that might have been over allocated, and you try to compress the schedule. So you try to reduce the time. And you're also doing risk analysis. You're looking at things, say earthworks, and saying we need to add a few days here for the risk that it might rain, or material deliveries. These might be late. We need to allow some time for that as well. In addition to that, the schedule is also other things that affect the schedule are the required procurement, things that you need to buy from external suppliers, internal resourcing, time-related risks, constraints. So you need to consider all of those as well, and other work such as erosion and sediment control, um, communications, uh, actually implementing the procurement, all those sort of things. So those all need to be considered when you're putting the schedule together. So the schedule is also known as a program or a timetable. The format we normally use is a Gantt chart, which shows the start, finish dates, duration, sequencing. So hopefully you all know this, but I'll talk about it anyhow. So the left hand side there'll be a unique identification thing, a work WBS number. Okay, now every work package should have a unique numerical identifier. There might be curb and channel on this section, and then there might be another section where there's curb and channel as well. So you need to have a unique identifier. Now, so you've got the tasks written down there. It's usually best to have nice, short, sharp sort of tasks, and then later on in the project report explain in a little bit more detail what each one of those are, what the scope of it is. You've got milestones at the beginning and end, and you probably should put some in the middle if you can. You've got summary tasks, so you've got the top level WBS second level tasks, and then the third level, which in this case are the work packages. So the work packages are shown as bars, and then they are summarized by the summary bars. Okay, you don't usually muck around with these at all. You don't use them for sequencing, you don't use them for resourcing. You use the work packages, which are these ones here. Okay, and then you've got the links as well. Show the links. So you can see this diagram is showing the sequence activities, what order things need to happen in, the connectivity, the dependency relationships between them, shown as these arrows, the dates, the duration, how long each one's going to take, and you might have a column here talking about the resources as well. So there's a lot of information in a Gantt chart, and it's a very effective way of showing how a project is to be implemented. So they are simple and easy to draw. Microsoft Project is really easy to use, and it's easy to change. It provides cost and resources as well as the time. It's good for simpler projects, although they use the more complicated ones like the Waterview Tunnel used Microsoft Project. They're widely used and understood, so most any engineer would be able to read it. It's some people call the Gantt chart the project plan. Sometimes that's all they produce. The disadvantages is it does not equate time and cost, and it leads to false security on the project. All because it's written down doesn't mean that's what's happening. So you need to understand that it's a guideline more than anything else. It's the plan. It can change as well. So you need to understand that as well. So all because it's written down doesn't mean that's what's happening. You need to be always comparing what you planned with what's actually happening. Now the critical path is a concept that's really quite important. Um, it's a series of activities that takes the longest time. Okay, so in this case here, the curb and channel, followed by the footpath, the driveways, the planting, is the critical path. These two here, if this sort of runs on for a day longer, it's not going to be, or half a week longer, it's not going to be a problem because the project's still going to finish on time. But if any of these critical activities run over time at all, then the whole project's going to run over time. So that's what critical activities are. Now if you're looking for what to focus your management on, it is these critical activities, is to make sure that they come in on time, that they have the resources to do it. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that you ignore these activities, because if this one say went on for a week over time, then all of a sudden the critical path becomes this non-critical activity becomes a critical activity. So the critical path is not set in stone. It can change as the project progresses. So non-critical activities are these ones in blue. They're not in the critical path. They may not, a little bit of time, half a week here is not going to delay the project, but if it went over a bit more, then they become critical activities, and then you've got to do something. So float is the amount of time an activity can be delayed before it becomes critical. So in this case here, you see that this one here, the float is about that much, which is about half a week. So if that's delayed by half a week, this would start there, and the whole project would still finish on time. So that's the float. Now the critical activities, if they are delayed by even 1 day, the whole project is going to be delayed. So critical activities have a float of 0. In other words, they can't go any further. So it's useful knowing float and critical activities, because if this item here is starting to run behind time, you might decide to divert resources from this non-critical activity into the critical activity to try to bring it back on time, which would mean that this one's going to run a little bit over time, but if it is only half a week, then you're still going to finish the project on time. So sometimes knowing what the non-critical and critical activities is quite important to be able to manage your resources to try to bring the project in on time. So the schedule development process, you determine the range of times. So the critical path method is managing that critical path. That's not to say you ignore the non-critical activities, but you're all about the critical path. So the process is you prepare the schedule using the WBS and the activity list down the left hand column, the work breakdown structure. Add the columns with durations and predecessors for each activity. Prepare an initial schedule using the durations and the predecessor and the scheduling that you've derived. Prepare a schedule usage, so see how you're using your resources, and adjust the timing so that the resources are properly used. So you don't want an excavator being used for a couple of days then sitting doing nothing for a week or two. You want to structure the work so that the excavator is being used continuously. Compress the schedule if possible. You look at it and you try to reduce the amount of time it takes, and then you finalize it. So you may well end up with an initial schedule, but then you find that maybe you're not using the resources properly, or you've got resources over allocated, which means that you've got, say, an excavator doing 2 jobs at once, and obviously it can't. So you either so you've got to deal with that, or it might be that you're not using it wisely. So you'll keep on mucking around with the schedule, the sequence, and the resources, and come up with something where you're using your resources properly and you bring the project in on time. So let's look at that resource leveling in a little bit more detail. So the resource leveling is removing unrealistic work allocations. In other words, you can't expect an excavator driver to be doing 2 things at once. So you can't say he's going to be spending a whole day on earthworks and at the same time he's going to be spending a whole day on digging a trench. It might be that he can spend half the day or half of his time on the earthworks and half of his time on digging the trench. So you can say 50% for each one, but you can't say if it's 100% of his time is allocated to the earthworks, you can't say 100% of his time is allocated to the drainage work. So it's called an over-allocation, overloading or overcommitment, and you need to resolve it by either delaying the activity, splitting the activity, or allocating more resources. So splitting the activity would be, you say, okay, well, he's going to work on the earthworks for 50% of the time and the drainage for 50% of the time. And if you can do that, that's fine. Okay, allocate more resources, we get another excavator. So we get 2 of them there. Now another reason you do resource leveling is to get consistency in resources. So you can see here you got a couple of labourers come on site, then you need 8 labourers, then you need 7, then you need 6, and so it's all over the place. So by moving the sequence around a bit, you end up with 2, then you bring 2 more on, and then they get consistent working, then 2 more, and then you start dropping everyone off. So you're actually using your resources consistently. Now with labour it's not so much of a problem because they can drive to site or drive to another site depending on where the work is, but something like an excavator, if you bring an excavator to site, you can't really move it to another site without extra cost. So you really want to get that excavator to site, get it to do the work that it's supposed to do, and then move it to the next site rather than have it sitting around doing nothing for a few days. Right, and schedule compression. This is where you're trying to reduce the duration of the schedule. All too often you'll go through all those processes I've talked about before, and you'll find that it's going to take you 16 weeks to do the project with the resources that are available to you, and with the sequence that you've come up with. Now you might have only 12 weeks. It might be that the conditions of the contract say the project has to be finished in 12 weeks. So you need to reduce the amount of time that that the works are undertaken, and there's several ways of doing it. So crashing the schedule is adding or reallocating resources to critical activities. So remember, you can take some resources from non-critical activities and put them on critical activities, so the critical activities will take less time to do, and if you can reduce the time on a critical activity, you're reducing the time the project takes. Having said that, if the non-critical activity then becomes a critical activity, then you've got a problem and you're not going to reduce the time. So the aim is to reduce the critical activities duration, reduces the project duration. So that's crashing the schedule. Or you can bring new resources on. So instead of having 2 or 3 to 2 excavators, you get 3 or 4. So you bring a couple more on. But that has cost implications. So it's going to cost you more. So you just hope that that's extra efficiency is going to result in a cost saving overall. And fast tracking is overlapping activities. So sorry, that should be lead. So lead, carrying out activities in parallel. So applying lead to work packages so that you're reducing the time that each takes. Now once you have done all of that work, you will end up with a schedule that has all the resources being efficiently used. It's being done within the time that's required. There aren't any resource over allocations, and so you're happy with that schedule and you're ready to finalize it. So that's the baseline schedule. This is what you would go to tender on, so that if you're a contractor for a construction project, this is what you'd base your tender price on, and this is what you submit to the client. If it's a consultancy contract, this is what you'd submit. Now this is cast in stone. It's not adjusted when the work starts. So that when the work starts, you can always look back on that baseline schedule and say, well, this is what we planned to do, and this is what's actually happened. So you can ask yourself, why did that happen? Was it because the client added more work, in which case we need to be claiming some variations? Or was it bad weather that we didn't predict, in which case there's a lesson learnt and we need to do better next time? So the baseline schedule is used when you're executing the works. It's a comparison. You will have another schedule which will be always being updated as it goes, and you'll be comparing that schedule to the baseline schedule, so you always know where you came from, what you based your original schedule on. Now before we finish this video, I want to show you this, which is called a linear schedule. So this is different from a Gantt chart. So we looked at a Gantt chart before, and it's the way that most projects are shown. But in addition to that, if you're dealing with a big horizontal project such as a road or a motorway, then you might also have a linear schedule. And you can see that this is a little bit different from a Gantt chart. The work packages are written on these things here with different colors. So there'd probably be a legend there, so showing what each one of those means, what each one of those colors means. There's a long section of the road, and so and there's the time down the side there. So we can see the earth moving starts at the beginning of February. So there's February, starts at the beginning of February and ends at the end of February, and that's the earth moving for this part here. Okay, so they're doing, which is a bit funny actually. So the those piles there, they're doing the piling from the middle of February to the end of February. Then constructing the foundation from the beginning of March to the middle of March, then they're constructing the pier, and then probably concreting it all in. So you can see that the time is this way, and that relates to that pier there, that pier there, that pier there. Then there's a tunnel, and this relates to that tunnel. So we're starting the tunneling on the end or the beginning of August, and we're finishing at the end of March. So you can see that it shows it as time and location. Not too much detail, but it still allows you to sort of plan how everything's going to go along the whole site. So you could say, well, we could get one crew doing all this. We could get at the same time. We could get another crew doing the earth moving. We get another crew sort of preparing for the tunneling. So you can plan your resources a little bit better along the whole line, so that the resources can that the work can be undertaken without everyone getting in each other's way. So that is, as I said, it's quite hard to produce, and you'd only really use it for big type projects. You don't need to know how to prepare one, you just need to know what they are.